Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I'm going to be doing a review of a book that is a little bit different from the stuff that I usually tend to talk about on this channel. This is The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. This came out earlier in 2019, I believe in February of 2019, and it's had a lot of buzz. And I initially had heard about this book and had heard a lot about it floating around, and then my friend Amber from Books of Amber listened to the audiobook and really enjoyed it. She highly recommended it, so I decided to pick up a copy. And then I had some spare Audible credits lurking about recently and decided to pick up the audiobook because I really enjoy nonfiction on audiobooks, even though it's not something that I usually tend to consume as a reader. And I had a lot of hesitations, I think, going into this book that I will explain later, mostly to do with Jack the Ripper and the Jack the Ripper case. However, I ended up being really impressed by this book. I thought that this was phenomenal, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about it today. Just a couple of really quick notes before we get started. Unlike a lot of the book reviews that I tend to do on this channel, this is actually a book that I bought with my own money. It is not a review copy. I was not sent this by the publisher. I picked this up in my local Waterstones. Also, I am going to, as the author of this book does, assume that you have some knowledge of the Jack the Ripper case. Just some kind of like basic knowledge of that case. And it's so famous that I assume you probably would, but just in case you don't, that's going to be something that's in this review. So let's get started. If you're looking for a true crime book, this is not the thing for you. And I think that that is what really drew me to this book, because I have a lot of issues with the interest in Jack the Ripper. There's so much, I don't know, it starts to feel like glamorizing of this case, of this kind of time period. There's a lot of mythology about these women who tend to kind of get forgotten, and this is all stuff that she talks about in this book really extensively, and is kind of the point of this book. These women, these kind of canonical five, the five that we know were killed by Jack the Ripper. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not he killed other women as well, but these are the canonical five. And there's so much about them that I assumed we didn't know, because all we hear about them is that they were prostitutes and they were killed on the streets. And prostitute's going to be a word that I use because it's not only the word that is used in this book, it's also appropriate to the time period rather than sex worker, which is what I would say now. But that was kind of the idea about them. And most people know like their first names, or know a couple of their first names, but really the victims get forgotten in Jack the Ripper sort of, not like mythology, but sort of in a lot of the interest in that case. And it's something that I have always been a little bit uncomfortable with, but could never quite put my finger on why. And I think that she does a really, really good job. If you are someone who is like me, who is also kind of iffy about this particular case, I think she does a really good job of highlighting that and being like, this is probably the reason why, you know, these women were people, and in a lot of ways they get degraded after their death. You know, people talk about how, you know, they were unattractive with the exception of one who was really attractive. They talk about how they were just prostitutes. We have so much more interest in Jack the Ripper himself rather than these women. So that's a really, really long preamble to say that I was interested in this book because it is about the victims, which is not something that we always get in true crime. And I feel like often, even in other cases, say the Zodiac Killer or, you know, Son of Sam, all of that, we are much more interested in the killer for a lot of legit reasons like psychology and trying to understand why someone does the things that they do, but we forget the people who actually lost their lives. And one of the things that she makes a really big point about talking about in this book is that they were wives, they were mothers, they were friends, they were daughters. These people had lives before they were taken away. And in forgetting about that, and in kind of glamorizing Jack the Ripper and this case, we are dehumanizing them. So again, a big, big point in this author's column for me, because I thought that that was fantastic. I can't think of another book, although I'm not very well versed in true crime, that does something like that. This book is divided into 5 sections, one for each woman, and then there are chapters within, and she goes through their lives. And she doesn't just go through kind of what their day-to-day lives would be like, who their families were, what their childhoods were like, because she does dig up quite a lot of information. She also talks about the other women who were in similar situations, the poor women of this time period, because I think that in a lot of, say, books and film and whatnot, we see either a kind of nice, glossy, almost romanticized version of poverty sometimes in this particular time period, and sometimes we just don't see poor people at all. So I think that she does a really amazing job of setting the scene, of letting you know not just what it was like for these women, but what the workhouses were like, what, you know, it was like sleeping rough, where people would go, sort of the political situations that were in hand at the time, all the things that would have shaped these women's lives. And she does an amazing job of talking about the problems of alcohol, because really alcohol is the reason that these women had their lives to the point where they were kind of on the streets and ended up being murdered. And it's really tragic because especially for Annie Chapman, who was the second victim, she lived a fairly middle-class life. She was the wife of a coachman in the countryside, and through a series of unfortunate events ended up in Whitechapel, in the workhouses and in these boarding houses. And she has this wonderful way of writing where it feels like it's very much coming alive, and you don't feel like you're reading a novel at any point. It's still a very kind of serious book. And it still feels very sort of factual and like you are reading a history, but she writes it in such a way that it is incredibly impactful and powerful. I think that she does a great job of doing her research into their families, finding as much as she can about these women. So for example, one of them was the wife of a chapbookman who would go around and, you know, sell small items around the countryside, and they would write ballads together. And she actually found the only surviving ballad of this particular woman that she wrote, which is lovely. It's in the book as well. So she just brings this flavor and this life to them that I've just never seen before. And something else that she does that I really appreciate for these women is she doesn't talk about the murders. We basically go from their childhood through kind of their adulthood. We get to them being murdered, sort of what happened, but we don't talk about the brutality of the crimes. A little bit, but she doesn't talk about what exactly was done to these women, which is horrible. She doesn't talk about Jack the Ripper himself. She doesn't talk about the case, nothing like that. We move on to the next victim. And it talks a little bit about the way that the murders were impacting people in their lives, because after the first one or two, people were really on high alert, and later victims knew that there was this murderer around. So you get that, but if you're looking for a book about the Jack the Ripper case, as I say, this is not the one for you. This very much reads like a social history, and that was something that I really, really liked about it. The conclusion of this book as well, because it is the 5 sections, and then we have this sort of conclusion section that's called Just Prostitutes. And this author's angry. I really appreciated that. She talks about how, you know, Jack the Ripper is now basically been turned into, you know, tourism. He's on t-shirts, he's glamorized, you know, he has this sort of almost romantic mythology about him with the foggy streets of London and the man in the hat, you know, walking through, stalking his next victim and everything like that. And she talks about how this is really wrong. You know, we forget about the victims in these cases. We forget about the other women who were in danger, who were living on the streets. 2 of the 5 victims in the Jack the Ripper case are the only ones who are actually confirmed to be prostitutes. The others were just sleeping rough. They were homeless. They couldn't afford their lodging for the night. And the fact that we have all of these ideas about the case, and she talks about how it was reported and how some of these ideas were perpetuated, and it's just terrible because we don't know these people at all, and the common knowledge about this case has nothing to do with the women who were killed. So if you're looking for a book that is going to be very fiercely feminist, which this is, and it's really going to teach you something and may actually sort out some rights and wrongs in your head about this case, I would definitely pick this up. The audiobook is really, really good. The narrator for it is just fantastic. It's a little over 10 hours long, so it's very easily consumable. I devoured that audiobook. This flat was very, very clean when I was listening to it, and it will make you want to light the patriarchy on fire and or punch a ripperologist, as I very angrily said via Twitter as soon as I finished this book. You really get that sense of the author lighting a fire under your ass to change, to make some kind of change in the way that we view especially women in history, and it's really fantastic. So I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think this is well worth your time. Even if you're not necessarily a nonfiction reader, I think that it is highly readable, and it is readable enough that it would be a good way to ease your way in. But if you're also a hardcore nonfiction history reader, I think this would also appeal to you because the facts are there, the sources are there, and she does a really great job, especially of talking about the social history. So that is my review of The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. So I would love to know if you have read this book, if it's something that you're interested in. I know that nonfiction is not necessarily something that I talk about on this channel a lot. I'm much more of a sci-fi and fantasy reader, but I would really love to hear what you guys think about this book, if it's something that has captured your interest, if it is something that you are interested in general, if you have a fascination with true crime or with Jack the Ripper, definitely let me know. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.